Welcome into the Depths Podcast, Episode 9. We're joined today by Lady Mystique, Airy Faye,
Hi.
Valgoria, and Arachnids.
Hello there.
Hello there indeed. And we have a unique topic tonight. We're talking about the legalities of BDSM and Kink. So what does that mean exactly? We're talking about both providing Kink and BDSM services, as well as navigating your own personal relationships with people as you, find out people's boundaries and set appropriate, I don't have the right verbiage for this, but just making sure that communication's key and that you set proper agreements with your partners and
setting an appropriate framework for play.
There we go. An appropriate framework for play. This is why we have Mystique on all the time. Mystique's got the verbiage. Yeah.
You're the brains, I'm the mouth.
Exactly. So yeah, chat, if you have any questions at any point during the podcast, feel free to drop them in chat. I will acknowledge and be routing traffic in chat. I won't be speaking a whole lot because I don't have a lot of experience with BDSM and Kink, to be honest, but we have some very talented and experienced individuals here on the panel today. So let's do introductions. We'll start with Mystique and go in order. So Mystique, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Lady Mystique. I have a background in sexology, although I am not qualified and do not practice. I also own a Femdom BDSM Kink server on Discord, and I have been a dominatrix for 16, 17 years now. I have dabbled in being a pro dom. Mostly I am a lifestyle dom with my partners. And it's lovely to meet you.
Mystique is a very frequent guest on the show and also co-host occasionally. We value her experience and welcome her back to the podcast. Next up, we got Airy Faye.
Hello. My name is Airy Faye. I am primarily a streamer here on Twitch. I am a former educator. I'm trying to step my way back into it. Performance, dom, and sub. Realistically, a switch. Lifestyle as well. I have developed and worked with legal experts in Kink and BDSM on waivers. I've run a venue and a nationally award-nominated boutique that focused on education previously around primarily consent and sexual wellness.
That's awesome. When Airy laid out all of her qualifications and experience, it was a no-brainer to have her on this one. What a great experience.
She was dropping some knowledge in our group chat before this, and my mouth was just like.
Yes, we'll be looking at some of that as well.
I won't lie, it was anxiety info dumping because I was like, I haven't touched this in a minute. Let's refresh ourselves.
Yeah, it's funny because I had been traveling recently, so I hadn't had a lot of time to organize the questions and the topics, and then we got a tsunami of information. Okay, we have stuff to talk about. we got stuff to talk about.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. And
it's praise, I promise.
It is praise. Next up, and this is important, the idea for this podcast comes from Valgoria herself. Val pitched this idea to me last month, and I thought it was a great idea. And in a bit, she will introduce the topic. But for now, how about just an introduction, Val?
Sure. Hello all, I'm Valgoria. I'm a horror VTuber, and also a lifestyle dom. Although I love pushing towards the extreme end of things. I don't have any professional experience, but I definitely like to push boundaries. And so as I went to push some boundaries, I started thinking about why, or what I needed to do to protect myself, or what would happen if, things went wrong. So that's where this topic came from, but more on that later.
Yeah, thank you, Val. Before we move on, can you tell us the difference between a lifestyle dom and a performance dom?
So professional dom is someone who actually works with clients. A lifestyle dom is someone who just works with their partners.
I see. Very useful information. Next up, we have Arachnids, the handsome fellow on the table.
Hello, everyone. I am Arachnids. I am a Twitch streamer, and in my personal life, I'm a shibari rigger. I work with adult content creators that want to expand their content with photo shoots, videos, and the like. And I've been part of the Kink community for a very long time, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much, Arachnids. Fun fact, I've known Ned for a little bit. I did not know all that about him, though, until the podcast topic came up. I'm like, oh, okay. Would love to hear more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Happy to spread the wisdom.
So Val, why don't you tell us a little bit more, to start us off, about why we're talking about the legality of kink and BDSM?
Absolutely. So, BDSM is sort of on the boundary of what's socially acceptable a lot of times, and often even pushes into the realm of what's not socially acceptable, both by sort of societal standards as well as legally. So, as I was trying to push the boundaries of what I could do, I wanted to make sure that my subs were safe in the process, and if something went wrong, we had a way of ensuring that they got the care that they needed. However, as I started to push further into research on what to do if injuries should arise, I realized that there are limits in which you can have as far as agreements around consent, and there are, a lot of laws that are very much in opposition to even what is considered sort of the mainstay of BDSM. So,
Because it's considered gross bodily harm or actual bodily harm, the legal terms. Because if you get physical with people, you are legally, technically committing assault, even if they consent to it.
Yes. Yes. So consent has limitations, and as soon as consent butts up against the law, guess what? You don't really have consent to give it. So you need to find ways to navigate that in BDSM spaces. So I continued to read up more and more as I became a little bit interested in the boundaries and a lot of the legal sort of defenses around BDSM, and found it's something that people should be aware of, because when you're going into the bedroom to do BDSM, you're taking on multiple risks, and so I think people should understand that when they do it.
Thank you. That's a great point. It's something that I think is not talked about quite often, is that yes, two parties can consent to a lot of things, but when we're outside the realm of normal legality or morality even, these things do come up. Like what happens if you have to go to the emergency room, or what happens if somebody sees a bruise or something like that, and that's when more developed conversations have to come to play. And I think that's what was fascinating to me, because I think before the stream started, Aries showed us some very lengthy documents about questionnaires and release forms that people do have to sign before getting any sort of services. Yeah. Could you speak a little bit more to that, Aries?
So the documents I sent you are actually the waiver that we had for the venue for when we were holding events, or even offering the space for people to have a space to play. Because a lot of people don't have the time and money to invest in, or even the space to invest in, personal dungeons and things. And we had the equipment for that in the venue that I ran. And a lot of that, because it was also technically considered an open, safe space for our community overall, every time anybody came into the building, they'd have to sign those waivers of saying, hey, I'm here to be here, but also to either participate or witness in bondage or sadomasochistic scenes, and I understand that there are risks with what I'm doing, and that I'm not going to sue or press charges against the event holders or hold them or their building owners responsible when I'm voluntarily taking part in this. And then the questionnaires that I sent are primarily around building a framework for a relationship and informed consent, so that people know how the other person they are discussing with or negotiating with views what they are about to do and where their knowledge is as far as their knowledge and experience is as far as safety and consent, and that making sure everybody's on the same page of really the big thing when it comes to court and law is informed consent. You hear it a lot in medical terminology is informed consent. You need to know what you're getting into, the risks that are involved, and that's where like the I know we'll come up to it later, RAC is involved, risk aware, consensual kink, safe, sane, consensual sex and play, anything of that nature. And those waivers are primarily to release liability of we can't sue because we got hurt doing something we voluntarily chose to do.
But not only that, demonstrating that they knew the inherent risks involved with the activity, I assume.
Correct. Because with any type of play, and I do mean any type of play, there's always a risk of some kind of getting hurt in one way or another, and even inherently that becoming the only way I can put this is bluntly is even a risk of death, because even things as simple as choking, which a lot of people are into, people do it incorrectly, whether you do it towards the trachea or the blood vessels, that sort of stuff can cause clotting or damage the airway, and in the end that is a very risky thing to do. So having these waivers in place sort of protect businesses and individuals against harm, whereas individuals consenting to this really have to negotiate and be prepared when it comes to the repercussions if the law or even medical professionals are involved.
Ned, if you don't mind me asking, how do you sort of like warn your clients about the inherent risk with Shibari?
So before any session, I have what I call my little speech. I let them know what's going to happen, what specific ties we're going to do, where they should feel pressure and where they should not feel pressure. And depending on how experienced they are, is generally how like comfortable, how tight I will go. If you're new to it, I do not go tight on a model because they don't know what their limits are, what their thresholds are. So some people call it the 2-finger rule or like the Sharpie rule. Like you don't go anything that you can't fit 2 fingers in or a Sharpie in. I tend to go with newer models even looser than that.
And with ropes especially, like it's like with locks in martial arts. Like by the time you feel it, it can be too late.
Oh,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Which is why, as a safety precaution, I carry around those medical cloth scissors that everyone should carry around if you're doing any kind of rope play. You can always get more rope, you can't get a new life. And it's up to us as riggers to protect them of that. But to me, it's always, this is what I'm going to do, this is what you should feel, this is what you should not feel. And if any of this doesn't sound good to you, please let me know.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I will say, for others, if some people are just exploring rope and shibari or any type of ties, and that double check that they have the safety kit. If they don't have the safety kit, then they are not prepared for emergencies.
Exactly.
Also, know your places that are safe for anchoring. There are areas in the body which are more susceptible for damage, nerve-ending damage, blood vessel damage. Know those areas and know how to avoid them.
Yes, especially as a rigger, like my big thing is like wrist and neck, where a lot of people want to be tied up, is super dangerous to do.
Mhm.
And like even slightly too much pressure on your wrist will give you, I call it limp wrist syndrome, where like it will be almost impossible for you to move your wrist. So like everyone's like, oh yeah, tie up my hands. I'm like, no, you're not experienced for this enough. Let's do like something on the arms, the legs. Obviously avoiding that there's still bad spots there you don't want to tie on, but like wrist and neck to me is like, please be careful. I know it looks really cool when you have it there, but it's so dangerous. I mean, if they don't know what they're doing, they can really hurt you.
So in this sort of scenario, how would be the best way for someone receiving this to communicate discomfort or an issue that they're having?
Hey, this doesn't feel right. Or hey, this feels a little tight. Like, the person that's tying should know that, like, they should know. If they're in there and they're touching, they should probably know it's too tight. But when it comes to, it's not my body, I can't really feel what's going on. Saying like, hey, this feels a little tight, or hey, this is starting to feel a little restrictive. If you start getting tingles anywhere, please let them know you should not be getting tingles. That is a very bad sign.
Yeah, no tingles at all with rope. Sorry. I am both a rope bunny and a rigger, so I 100% agree with everything you're saying. And I'll say, as someone who has been a hesitant submissive prior, and I don't really talk about my submissive side publicly a lot because that's a very personal thing for me. If you struggle with communicating no, or like that you're uncomfortable with something, it's okay to say, hey, can we just take a second to give me a second to assess how I'm feeling? Okay, can I have a second to feel this out? Because if you're not sure, then you should pause instead of continuing.
As a rigger, to jump off of that, please, if you're not comfortable, doesn't even have to be physically. This is a high-risk kink, not just physically, but also emotionally.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
If you're starting to get into a headspace you don't want to get into, it is perfectly acceptable, and please use your safe word to let me know you're no longer having a good time, and I'm going to get you at that rope, one way or another. But, like, being comfortable enough to tell your partner that in whatever activity you are doing is super important.
It's essential. If you feel that you would be too uncomfortable to say your safe word, then you shouldn't play at all. That's
100%.
That's just a hard line. Because don't do that to your dom, and don't do that to yourself. If you cannot speak up for yourself, do not play. Do not get into BDSM. It is not for you.
Yeah, you are risking traumatizing yourself and your partner.
From just a non-rope or like edge play perspective, like just as something general, something that I found very important is to communicate to subs their sense of agency and autonomy within the scene, and that they absolutely have certain rights and things that they should do to protect themselves, but they also have the responsibility to protect themselves because, as you said, Ned, that it's not my body. I can't feel what you're going through. I can't tell what you're going through in your head. So, like, if you get to a point where you're melting down, then that is a situation where you have failed to use your safe word early enough. And we need to reassess where that started going wrong and why you felt that you weren't able to use your safe word. And like to give them a sense that they are not just here to serve you. And like if they want to, play, then they have to just take whatever you give them. And that it's not a matter of rudeness or rejection. It is a matter of your responsibility because your dom doesn't want to hurt you, and you are giving your dom the tools that they need to treat you responsibly and respectfully. And honestly, that works in any kind of setting, kink or not, romantic, sexual, friendship. Give people the tools they need to treat you the way you want to be treated. Also, my phone is about to die, so I'm just going to have to switch over to my webcam for tracking real quick. So
All good, Mystique. But
You bring up a
great-
good point. You bring up a
great
good
points.
point about.
Yeah.
Well, that's also
treating us
why,
responsible.
even if like we don't agree beforehand that like no means yes, I still want to use a safe word, because to me that gives the sub a tool where maybe they don't want to say no, but they at least know that there's like a word or an avenue that they can always get out of this if they don't want it.
Indeed, there is no politeness when it comes to like this sort of thing. Like, don't just go along with something because they think that they may want it, or gotta communicate.
Exactly.
I think you were saying something before.
Yes, yes. I was saying that Mystique makes a good point about reminding your sub that they have an avenue to discontinue the play. Sometimes when we're really getting into it, and I hear a lot of whimpering and crying starts, I just take a moment to say, I didn't hear a safe word, and then keep going, because it's just a moment for them to remember that that is an option. Because in the middle of very intense play, sometimes people kind of lose track of what their tools are to call an end to it.
I actually have a hard no on crying unless I'm super familiar with you. If you start crying, I'm using the safe word and we're stopping. Unless, again, I'm comfortable with you, I know your limits. But yeah, crying's one of my hard no's.
So that's interesting.
We
So
got very
you also
intense
have a
in
safe.
this
You
household.
also have a safe word, then I'm guessing.
Yes. Anybody in a dominant role always has the option to use the same safe word or to assess the situation and judge sort of where they think the submissive is at. I know we're doing a lot of addressing towards submissives, but here for the doms that are newer or trying to explore more of how they can have a different type of control in a situation. If you think that your submissive is too low for you to safely take further or come out of if you go any further, you have the right to also withdraw from the scene and assume aftercare immediately for yourself as well as for the submissive. You have that same autonomy as they do. Please use that. Don't think that just because you really want to keep going or they seem like they really want to keep going, if there is an aspect in a scene where they are like something looks a little off even remotely, or they seem like they're about to get emotional or potentially triggered or close to like anxiety, or it seems just like they're going nonverbal and you don't have a drop tool on hand, or you haven't communicated nonverbal boundaries and safety measures, then it's at that point you should definitely start withdrawing from a scene. You have that authority as well. But submissives, you have your power to withdraw. Doms, you also have your power to withdraw. Please both communicate, find a system. If you don't have a safe word that you could remember, a lot of people I know in a lot of communities and a lot of events that I know use a stoplight system, which is red, yellow,
that's what
green.
I use.
That's what I
And then
use.
it's a if you don't want to ask outright, I didn't hear a safe word or something like that, you can also go, what sort of color are we feeling? Are we still like, don't necessarily lead, give them the opportunity to pick the part of the stoplight that they're on if they're still green, or like very enthusiastic nods. Non-verbal communication is also going to be something I highly recommend you prepare for, because a lot of newer submissives will almost always go nonverbal mid or late scene, and I am definitely one of those. I will admit to
I
it.
see. So we do have a
So
question
there-
from Chad actually about this. So by the
Yes.
way, Chad, if you ask any questions, I'll reply "gotcha" to say that it's in queue. So Frankerzoid says, "I'm curious when it comes to the use of safe words. What if your partner gets into a state where they can't think clearly enough that makes them being able to say the safe word very hard? Is it good to have multiple fail-safes or safe words to be able to work? So basically, should you have multiple safe words, or should you just have just the one, or a system?"
Have a system. Especially if you're newer and you know that they get to a point where they can't think clearly enough, or you think they might get to a state like that. Let's put it in perspective. Say you have a friend who has severe anxiety and they go nonverbal when that anxiety kicks in. How do you communicate with them? Typically hand signals, or writing, or nods. Simple communication. You go back to as if they are still learning how to communicate with you. Or if you have like a break in a language barrier, per se. You definitely want to have something in place. That's where that is. You can have, if they don't give you a safe word or give you the okay 3 or 4 times in a row, you can establish that with them beforehand as an emergency plug, where it's like, you didn't give me the go-ahead this many times, at which point I thought it was best to pull us out of this to recover, to figure out where we're at, to gauge what's going on in that little mind of yours.
Yeah, it's like Val said, you are absolutely within your right to stop the scene at any point. Oh my god, I hate the tracking on this webcam. But if your sub is at a point where they are not able to communicate and they have entered a headspace where they are not able to give continuous enthusiastic consent to what you are doing, it's up to you to stop the scene at that point. Because remember, consent is a verb. It's given at all times and can be withdrawn at any time. So if your partner gets to a point where they cannot consent, be it because of a scene or because they're drunk or like whatever, then, it's all systems stop.
There are also some good tools for dealing with nonverbal or situations where your partner is unable to verbalize consent or a change in how they're feeling about the scene. So you can use things like holding onto a ball or a bell, and if they drop either of those, that's the moment in which you know to stop. It's a simple action for them to take that can help them to easily communicate that they can't continue.
Oh, apparently your volume is very low, Atra.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Also, if your sub is like gagged or whatnot, I always like having a hand sign.
Oh yeah.
If people go nonverbal, I've at least found that they're more likely to throw a hand sign and be comfortable with doing that. So like I always do like 2 fingers, like the Gladiator movie. Like I want to stop. Kind of.
I yield.
I yield.
I have done the drop item system. I have done the hand sign system, and I've also done a tapping system to represent the same colors of the stoplight system, where if my dom asks me a question, they'll put their palm, or if I ask my sub a question, I'll put my palm where they can tap on it, or I can tap on it 1, 2, or 3 times to represent whichever we designate as an okay or a stop. So that if they are gagged, or if they are in a position where like they can't really put their hand up to catch attention, they can make a sound on occasion and check hands frequently in case they do try to, or place yours close by on occasion. As much fun as you may be having, make sure you do check-ins.
Yes, check-ins
are very important. Especially since when you're having that much fun, time can pass very quickly. So personally, I like to set quiet little timers for every 15 minutes or less, depending on what I'm doing. With rope, it's more often so that I'm keeping an eye on blood flow and tingliness. And for other things, it's a little more spread out for check-ins to see where they're at mentally, to see if they're still enthusiastic consent.
So the tingliness would be from like constricted blood flow, I'm assuming.
It's more from nerves being cut off than restricted blood flow, but both.
Oh, okay.
Because you have to follow the anatomy of where major nerves and major arteries are. The tingliness can come from nerves being blocked even before the blood flow getting cut off.
Interesting.
And I say that as someone who has neurological damage and conditions and feels that often. Where if you have rope around, say, the arm, there's a particular spot where there's not an artery, but there is a nerve. And if the rope lands the wrong way, their hand starts tingling and they can't really move one or two fingers. They'll feel that before the blood will stop flowing to that same hand.
Interesting. It's almost not unlike martial arts in a way.
Correct.
Mhm. Exactly. Tap early, tap often.
But yeah, the nonverbal communication, make sure you establish beforehand as a safety, even if you don't think they might, or even if you don't think you might go nonverbal. Try to communicate that beforehand and establish that so that you are prepared in the event it does happen.
I think what's striking to me about what you showed me earlier, the questionnaire for anyone entering the kink space, is how similar it is to a doctor's office almost.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
It's like a doctor's office, but with like some behavioral elements in it too. It's very interesting. I'm gonna pop it up on screen like in a bit, but like I just want to sort of like discuss that. Like, what's sort of thinking that goes into like making a forum like that for a kink space?
For that, when I was working on it, I combined my personal preference based off of what I've seen in previous forums, because there's a lot of like free forums you can find online for BDSM checklists and figuring out what you both like and how to communicate that and exploring that, and then like basic information. And then I worked with a close friend who is a legal expert, and then I worked with another close friend who is actually a doctor. And then I took some of my psychology training as well and my personal experience to make that so it's addressing the first part. If you look at it, name, age, that kind of stuff, that primary information is for in the event a medical emergency occurs in the middle of the scene and I have to call paramedics, what information I have to give them. That is the first part there. The same thing you give to a doctor, the same thing you give to any professional office for emergency contact, or in the event paramedics or officers of the law show up. It's the identification they require, allergies, medical conditions, etc. Medical conditions also attribute to how you're going to approach play to begin with. So say somebody has, like I have, postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. You don't even know what that is. You see POTS on a medical list and you have to Google it. It's a heart condition where if my posture changes too quickly, I could faint and go limp in rope or bondage. That is a very risky thing. It's a higher risk of injury than just being a healthy individual going into a scene. It's things you don't even expect. There are conditions that can impact how you play, period, that your partner should be aware of. And that's part of that informed consent and being prepared for medical emergencies, because you never know when something's going to go wrong. Always be prepared. Expect the best, but always be prepared. And then the psychological aspect, as someone who has a lot of personal trauma, I brought these questions to this forum as how I wanted to communicate to my doms and my subs what my triggers I knew of at the time were, the things I experienced so that they knew why or what to avoid, or both, and how to take care of that, because a lot of people respond to aftercare and emotional care in different ways. So like some people's anxiety solution is a stuffy and treats in a corner, or some people want cuddles, and some people don't want to be touched at all, and they'd rather just sit by themselves and process what they've experienced.
I have a friend who's like that. Like, she's also into like needle play. She's into like very hard play, and she's also like, once the scene is over for my aftercare, like, bring me tea and chocolate and leave me alone. Do not touch me. Leave the room. I just want to be by myself. So being able to establish what kind of aftercare a person needs in order to like come back from a very intense scene is also crucial.
Yeah. Okay, I see you're pulling it up on stream. So if
yeah.
you would like, I can go a little more depth into some of why certain types of questions are there. A lot of this is voluntary information. So you have your legal name if the authorities show up, preferred name for how you want to be addressed if it's different than your legal name.
You can put it over my face, it's okay.
LGBTQIA
to make it bigger.
Inclusive, period, overall. Pronouns are just part of vocabulary and how you want to be addressed. And then if you decide to establish a point of contact to continue to play after that point, you can always have the phone number and the email address. Phone number is primarily for authorities and emergencies. Your age and date of birth, primarily on there for confirming to a point that you are of a legal age of consent, as well as what is needed for emergency services.
Doing your due diligence.
It's due diligence, that's what it is. Gender identity can always be different than biological sex, which is where the how they're still working with licenses for your gender marker versus how your medical records from being born are. Maybe if you're trans especially, that matters for medicine in particular, so that when they do any tests they need to, they know what levels to expect for certain things. Because the male, female, and even the trans spectrum anatomies are very different when it comes to chemical composites. And then address, clearly, for the law. The biggest thing with marital status, sexual orientation, and romantic, all of that part is informed consent for knowing someone has other partners or if they don't. So that you are making sure you're getting tested regularly for STDs if you are in poly or have multiple play partners and one committed partner or no committed partners, and you're frequently changing sexual partners. That way you are prepared, and even if you don't think or have been told that somebody's clean, you're getting that test done regularly to make sure that you are healthy. Because an STD can come out of nowhere.
Always. Thank you for reminding me. I need to set mine up for next month.
You're very welcome. Making sure that you are giving them that informed consent of like, yeah, I've been tested recently and I'm healthy, but I also have this many partners, so we know to be prepared for testing a little more frequently than what you would normally expect. My actual primary care physician who helped me make this, because we actually met in the kink scene before he was my doctor, which was ironic enough, was saying that and recommended that anybody who is poly or has multiple sexual partners should get tested every 1 to 3 months. And then anyone who has one committed partner for the most part or no partners should get tested every 6 months to a year, just to sort of have that general health in the event you come across it through any other form of bodily fluid exchange by accident or intentional. The rest is a matter of voluntary information for the employed, financially responsible stuff, because some people want a full-time lifestyle arrangement, whereas others don't, and you can volunteer that information to help your dom or sub sort of gauge where you're at mentally with that if they don't already know. So when I first made this, I was working on a full-time arrangement with a domestic partner who had a completely different sleep schedule than I did, and I was full-time employed, they were part-time, and that I was at the time very financially irresponsible. And I admit to that because they helped me develop better habits. Some people use this as a way to develop better habits to improve their life.
Like this section
Personal-
is calling out VTubers in general.
And then like personal hygiene matters for sexual safety and wellness, which I teach on. And then like how you feel about how much free time you have, your sleep habits, which can impact how you come into a scene. If you don't sleep a lot or you don't sleep regularly, your mental and emotional responses, which can also impact your physical responses, may be a little bit slower or delayed or a little off because your judgment might be impaired by that poor sleep habit, as my doctor approached it. And then spiritual beliefs is to all sort of develop a framework to be respectful. And that's why it includes may or may not affect this dynamic negatively. If there's a difference in beliefs, can cause a little bit of rift. First aid certified and CPR certified and bloodborne pathogen certified is what that BBP is. I am all three.
Yeah.
You have to be BBP, bloodborne pathogen certified, to be a tattoo artist, a piercer, or to teach, and especially recommended perform things like needle play or knife play, and safety in cleaning up behind that. That is very helpful in being prepared and knowing how to clean up messier scenes that have blood in them.
I see.
If LGBTQIA+, are you out to your friends and family, or only some of them, kind of helps communicate a little bit clearer. If you somehow wind up around friends and family who don't know that you are out for what you're identifying here, that slip up can be avoided. And then legal medical information is pretty all-encompassing. A lot of medical forums I've seen will say recreational drugs, but people don't fully understand the scope of recreational drugs.
Right.
So I listed off a bunch of them and then was like, well, here's a space for other. Because in some states, marijuana is a recreational drug, where in others, it is medically acknowledged. It's acknowledged as a medical treatment for anxiety, pain, etc. Especially Michigan, where I was when I made this.
So is someone potentially being under the influence an issue when it comes to like setting up a scene or potentially turning down a scene?
Absolutely. Because if you are under the influence of any kind of drug or medication, and I actually bring this from my ghost hunting days, side note, it impairs the judgment as well as the senses so that nothing feels the same. You are at higher risk of harm physically and mentally. And if they're not honest with you about it, you should be playing with them to begin with.
Very true.
But this also impacts, like, in the event emergency does happen, how it's handled medically, because, like, if somebody's been smoking marijuana or doing even heroin, they're going to react differently to anesthetics if they wind up needing those for a surgery for an emergency.
Or it might mess with their pain tolerance.
Yeah, it'll mess with their pain tolerance too. That's part of where it impairs judgment and your senses. It impairs your vision, it impairs your physical sense, like your sense to touch, knowing somebody's touching you or close to you. It impairs your hearing. You can have hallucinations and think something's happening and freak out in the middle of a scene. And it could just alter the entire experience, which is just traumatizing, honestly, for whoever has to deal with that on the receiving end.
That's a great point. We'll come back to that form. It is, in fact, 10 pages long. So
it is very long. I spent a lot of time on it. I'm so sorry.
No, that was very informative. But I just want to jump off the thing about pain tolerance, because Ephorus did ask a question earlier. And Ephorus said, going off the nerve discussion, have you had experience playing with those have nerve issues or higher pain thresholds? How does gauging safely and limits differ with newbies versus experienced players?
Delgoria, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah. It's something that requires a lot of care. When you're first getting into play with someone who's more experienced and has a higher degree of pain tolerance.
It looks like you're sniffing me.
Sorry, I was taking a drink of my drink. I talked a lot in a very short period of time. Anyways. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. You really do need to sort of ease into things. And when I say that, I mean, test out certain acts very intentionally without the idea of it being a scene, so that you have a gauge for what's too much for you as a dom versus what's too much for them as a sub. That way you can figure out the right balance to avoid injuring them.
And something to kind of what I do is always start light.
Yes.
You can go harder, but once you go too hard, it's hard to reel it back into a comfortable area. So, like, I have my easy, medium, hard. If I'm using like paddling or spanking or something like that, just start out easy. If they're like, that's way too weak, go up to medium. But I do have a cutoff with, again, people I'm unfamiliar with or a partner. I won't go harder than what my hard is because I don't know your body. I don't know if you actually can take this or not. So I always recommend to people getting into the scene, especially to those of you that are getting into the dom side, start out light. Go harder as you need to, but start out light.
May I
ease into it.
may I add, like, it's kind of related, but it's a little bit of a tangent. I've seen Puzzle in the chat saying things like, this makes me feel a lot more safe knowing that, these kinds of procedures are in place. And absolutely, like, this should be something that you are aware of, but it's important to be aware of the fact that we are talking from the perspective of like an ideal and responsible dominant and submissive relationship, and that there are people who are not ideal or responsible. So it is still up to you to look for people using these safety practices and to make sure that you are safeguarding yourself and not getting into anything that you feel uncomfortable with, because there are unscrupulous people in any kind of group or social network, and I think it's very important to know that just because someone is part of like BDSM doesn't mean that they necessarily follow all these practices. So it is still very important to do your own due diligence for your safety.
That makes
It's very
sense.
important to research as a sub safety guidelines and to make sure your dom understands them. Just because someone has experience in doming for a long time doesn't mean that they've necessarily done their homework. I know in the past I was at fault for that, and then I got wiser, and then I figured out the right way to approach these things. But everyone's at different phases of their journey, and it's important to make sure that they're in a phase where they're going to keep you safe. So it's important to explore that with them.
Or a person that I am ex-friends with, who was like, he got into the BDSM scene, and we talked a lot about it because I was more experienced than he was. And he was a dom, and he was like, yeah, I asked him about aftercare that he did with his sub, and he was like, well, she's my sub, that's aftercare enough.
Red flag.
I wanted to fly South Africa and hit him with sticks. I was like, oh my god.
As a side note, there are unfortunately people in the scene who will claim to be an experienced dominant when they are actually not. When I did run this venue, we actually had to keep a list of abusers who had found their way into the scene and targeted more vulnerable individuals who were newer subs in our scene to make them think that they were a good dom and use that situation to abuse them and traumatize people. So that's where your due diligence also comes in, where it's a part of when you're discussing with anyone about having a dynamic, whether you're sub and dom, dom and sub, whatever your role may be for the other person or peoples, doing your own due diligence to find out how they approach boundaries, aftercare, desires, all of that, which is part of that questionnaire. It's just so long. You don't have to have a piece of paper with all of these questions in front of them to ask them that stuff, but you can go, well, how do you feel about aftercare, and these are my boundaries? And if they snap back with any sort of thing of like, well, I'm your dom, so what I say goes, that's an immediate red flag. You walk out of there and you do not ever do anything with that person ever again, because they are disrespectful of your boundaries as a human being with rights.
Yeah, I think. Oh,
Go ahead.
oh,
Are we all really just going to interrupt each other until one of us goes?
Ned, you,
Yeah.
I'm the host here. Ned, you go.
this is the rest of the podcast. Everyone can.
I just wanted to mention that, like, we lightly talked about this earlier, but also with aftercare, it's not just for subs either. I want to put out there, like, as doms, like, we can also go into a very dark headspace. It's a headspace I often don't like going into. So that aftercare of, like, to me, I'll say I love cuddling as aftercare, because it lets me show them that I do care about them. Things that we set in play were just for play, and it grounds me into, you know, I'm not this horrible fucking person that does these things. It's just, it was a play session, it was fun, hopefully we both had fun, but aftercare isn't just a sub thing, it's for everyone involved.
Oh yeah, especially when there's even from a psychological standpoint, a psychology standpoint, there is sub drop and dom drop, where after a scene you can, if you are not taken care of properly, drop into a space where you feel subhuman or face imposter syndrome, or just
dissociative,
all these negative emotions and dissociation. It can present itself as either a sudden emotional attack or a sudden emotional detachment, and it's not a good thing. So that's part of why aftercare is very important. 1, for the body, 2, for the mind, and it's for both of you. Especially if a dom is being very aggressive and violent with you, it's very important that you also check in with them after you sort of come back to earth. Subs, check in with your doms. Make sure that they don't need, make sure they have what they need to not feel guilty about what they've done to you, because gods know I have felt guilty, even on a performance standpoint. And I'm not saying as a professional dom, but I mean as someone who's performed a scene in front of an audience, rather. I felt terrible about something I did to a partner, when realistically it was a performance and me giving them what they had requested, and I was not a terrible person. I had to remind myself, just like Ned did. So it is very important you both communicate your aftercare needs, and if you as a dom don't think you need aftercare, I think it's time you take a step back and assess how you respond, or learn how you respond in that type of situation post scene, so you can figure out what your aftercare needs are to really nurture your mental space.
Introspection and the honest ability to self-assess is an incredibly important skill when engaging in BDSM, and we all need it. We all need practice. I fucking hate this tracking, so I'm just gonna not look at it. So it is super important for you to be able to self-assess, and also to talk to other people in the scene, because there are people, like Aries says, Eri.
No, you're fine. That's actually my name, so that's fine.
God. who are abusers, who will gaslight you so that you don't feel right. You don't feel that you should feel the way that you do. And being able to speak to other people in the community will keep you grounded and give you perspective on what isn't okay, particularly if you are a newer person in the community. Like, getting involved in the community, talking to people who you feel safe with, comparing experiences, whether you're a dom or a sub, is going to be a really important tool in your arsenal for keeping yourself safe. So I do encourage everybody to get involved in some kind of community, to be able to kind of keep yourself in a space where you have a sort of more objective perspective on what's going on in your relationship.
Sort of like a vibe check, basically. Like, okay, like
Yeah.
learning who's known to people, who's not known to people, what's normal, what's not normal. Because when you're operating in these sort of spaces, like you can't exactly just search these stuff up publicly. Like, this is
Correct.
things that,
Oh my god.
yeah,
Exactly.
Oh, if only you could.
Mhm.
Oh, if only there was a database somewhere. Jesus Christ.
So yeah, I'm actually glad you guys are talking about this, because in some ways it's not entirely natural for us to want to inflict pain or discomfort on people, but it is sort of like an element of this. And you know, feeling that from, like, you know, oh, I hurt somebody, or like I made someone feel like not, you know, can be damaging to your psyche. I totally feel that. I totally see that.
Can I be a sociology nerd for like a second?
Sure, go for it.
Please.
Sure.
So something that we studied in sociology way back in the day when the dinosaurs were young, when I was in university, is the ability to differentiate, oh my fucking god, this tracking, is the ability to differentiate the concepts of violence and harm. Violence is a thing that you inflict on someone. So it is causing, you know, verbal, emotional humiliation as some kind of mental change in mental space, or, you know, whether it's hitting someone or tying them up. I am gonna stick forks up my nose in a second.
Ignore it. Ignore it.
Sorry,
Ignore the titty slingshot. Power through.
Look at chat and focus.
I almost got sent across the room, damn it.
Yeah.
He's got black eyes over here. Just poof. The harm is what is received, and you can do violence without necessarily doing harm, because it is something that the person is enjoying, even though you're inflicting some kind of like physical pain on them. And it can be something that a person needs in order to feel safe, in order to feel grounded. And I think it's very important to differentiate violence and harm and speak about them differently, about how you want sort of any kind of violence or act to be performed upon you, and what kind of harm you receive, how you are interpreting that harm, and how, oh my god, how and how you are reacting to that harm that they are inflicting, and how to mitigate that reaction. Because people can, you know, enter spaces where they have like a huge emotional catharsis, and that can lead them into like a panic attack, for example, which is a symptom of harm, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. That there's been this huge catharsis and they need to sort of process it. So I do encourage people to sort of explore that topic more if you are new and looking to get into the scene. I'm just gonna turn this camera off.
Well, thank you. Well, there she goes. Thank you, Mystique. That was actually very fascinating to sort of like hear that distinction. It's not something I've heard before myself, to be honest. So that's very valuable for you to give us that input.
Thank you.
Just to do some quick curation of chat. So some questions that we had before. Frankerzoid, regarding your question about how to avoid hurting a newbie or whatever, like I would definitely suggest referring to the systems that were discussed here before: red light, green light, yellow light, working with an experienced sub. And so like if you're two newbies like experimenting, that doesn't sound like the two of you should be figuring it out. It seems like you should be going to a space and having the community sort of help you figure that out, I think.
Yes.
If you're
You
new
can
to
also
this.
have you can also have a mentor, sort of. And Frank, you're always welcome to DM me since we're friends.
Exactly, there you go. And same deal with for Raining Death. Asked the question like, how would you let your dom know that you're uncomfortable? What we discussed earlier in the stream was various, like, so there was the red light, green light systems, safe words, the tapping, whereas you tap someone's wrist or palm to simulate red light, green light, yellow light. I forgot the third light. There's like very, and even the item drop method. So there's various ways that you can get creative with it, as long as you discuss it in advance and sort of like have these laid out well, rather than try to do it in the middle of the session. And of course, communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And use.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, use the educational tools at your disposal. Like, the internet exists, educational spaces exists, like Discord, FetLife, like Dr. Nerdlove, whatever it is. So, like, don't just go, okay, I'm into this, it's time for me to figure this out all by myself. There are people who write and teach extensively on whatever topic you're into. It doesn't matter. Someone else is into it. So go into those educational spaces and find out how to do it. And you might even discover more about yourself and deepen your connection with your partner and with your kink.
I think Rain was more asking from the dominant side, asking how to encourage other submissive, and I would just touch base a little bit on that. On Val mentioned earlier, if they're doing a lot of whimpering, saying I didn't hear a safe word, which is really good. But if you are still pre-scene negotiations trying to encourage them, you can always treat no as no until you grow a little more comfortable in a dynamic, and continue to encourage them and even tease them for the enthusiastic consent, like tease it out of them. And if they are, that's where a lot of check-ins comes in. If they are very hesitant to use safe words, they can talk normally if they have the capability of just say, hey, this feels a little uncomfortable, but I'm not sure if I want a safe word on that. That's where like yellow in particular comes in with the stoplight system. So if you need more of a breakdown on that, just reach out or I'll give you guys the resources.
Yeah. On that note, Ari, could you define for us enthusiastic consent?
Enthusiastic consent. Oh, it's my favorite thing in the whole wide world, and I do not say that sarcastically, even remotely, as someone who has made plenty of people beg.
Yes. Yes.
My favorite thing is with enthusiastic consent. You definitely want to, if they're scared and hesitant, it's going to be a little bit harder, but definitely getting if they're pausing, give them a minute. But, oh, do you really want this? You really want this? I need you to tell me and show me that you really, really, really want this. I need that enthusiastic consent. You don't have to say enthusiastic consent. You say, I really need you to show me how much you really want this. And you should very much get that enthusiastic consent if they really want it, or even a start of it. Let them lead. let them lead for the most part, unless they're very hesitant. Just sort of guide them a little bit, but you definitely want to make sure that you have that enthusiastic consent. If it's something new and you're experimenting and you're trying it, talk more ahead of time, find what they're comfortable with, make sure that they are still comfortable as you're going in, and just eagerly nodding. Eagerly nodding is a very big thing. It's like, I want this. I don't want to say that I want this, but I want this. I'll pout about it, but I want this. I'll pout about it, and I don't want to admit it, but I want this. But again, my favorite thing with enthusiastic consent is begging. If it's not a very clear, yes, I want this, or very clear, I want you to do this to me, or I am begging you, please. If it seems like a maybe or a no, if it's a maybe, it's a no. If it's a no, it's a no. If it is unclear, it's a no. If it is not a yes and they are not clearly communicating that they really want you to do something, even with a little bit of hesitance of yeah, I want this actually. But you also have to remember that enthusiastic consent can be pulled at any point.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's a verb.
you have to keep an ear and an eye out for when that changes. That tone can change at any moment. It may not even be clear immediately, but you have to keep an eye on it. That's why the check-ins are regularly done. And why I am always going to tell those who are involved with myself especially, you best keep begging, because if you stop begging, then I don't think you really want it.
Enthusiastic consent, both fun and protects you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. There are a million sexy ways to say, hey, I want you to do this to me without dirty talk.
Yeah, one of the things that I find a lot on Miss, my Discord server, is that new people will come in who are not experienced in the scene, and they'll worry that it will like ruin the mood if they check in, and they think that it's like a stop and check with like a captain's hat and like a checklist. It's you can just whisper in the ear. Do you like that? Do you want me to carry on? Like exactly like what Ari Faye was saying. So like don't obsess about the mood. You can get the mood back. If you're horny, you could get the mood back.
Oh yeah.
And Frank, to answer your question, chat, there's absolutely subs who can be inappropriate or like can try to like sub to you without your consent. Like it goes both ways.
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
The number of people who will come and like call me mommy and be like, "Oh, come and step on me, mommy. Should I jerk off? What should I do?" And you're like, "Oh my god, go away." That's why we have a rule, and I'm sure you have something similar, Ari, in your venue, where we don't give people titles unless they specifically consent to them.
Titles are negotiated and consented to, yes. In
Exactly.
addition to bratting is negotiated and consented to, because not every dom has the patience or mental capacity to handle the different types of brats there are. And there is someone out there who will want to tame you, and there is someone out there who will want to just antagonize you, and then there are those who just cannot, and you need to respect that when the boundary is placed.
I'm screaming
I am not a brat.
in like my corner. I'm screaming right now.
So true.
I am not a brat tamer. I am not a brat tamer. I don't like it at all.
I am 100% with you.
I love taming a brat.
It's fun for some people, but if you can't pin them to the wall, it just gets annoying. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, that's the fun, is pinning them to the wall.
Yeah.
Or tying them to the wall.
I was gonna say turning them into a mess, but again, you have to be prepared for the brattiness. So if you are a brat and you go up to the dom and start bratting without actually getting their consent, you are technically breaking a boundary and breaking the rules of consent, and you need to reevaluate what you're doing. Please do.
Well, something that people need to realize, I think, is that both the dom and the sub are the architects of the scene. It's not just one person. They both have responsibilities, they both have rights, and they both have their roles in creating the scene, creating play, creating the relationship, be it an intimate romantic one, or a sexual one, or a professional one.
While we're speaking of consent, let me just clarify for you guys in chat who are not even interested in the BDSM or kink side per se, or even a dynamic. As someone who teaches on this, and I'm sure I could dedicate an entire fucking lecture to this because I already have, consent is not limited to negotiations of kink, and it's not just limited to sexual or romantic things. Consent is in all aspects of your life. You are consenting to see this doctor and have them treat you. You are consenting to this conversation. You are consenting to consuming this content, and you have the right to withdraw that consent at any point. The only time the consent may be in question is when the law is involved. You cannot consent to getting out of jury duty. You cannot consent to just breaking yourself out of jail without repercussions. There's a lot of things to it. You can't just skip court. You also have to play within the limits of the laws in your area. And that's primarily why we're here. But consent is in every aspect of your life, and you need to be aware of that as individuals who struggle with boundaries, I'm sure. You have the right to withdraw your consent to be involved with individuals or communities as a whole. You have the right to withdraw that consent of being surrounded by family, especially if they are toxic towards you. Your consent is yours.
Well said.
Regardless of what it is.
Well said. Spoken like a true sovereign.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think that segues us quite nicely into the legal aspect of things. And maybe a bit of what Val wanted to talk about. Val, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. So one thing that I was curious about, I was hoping that someone here would have a little bit more experience in, as we got everyone together. So, if someone gets injured going to a hospital, there is a lot of risk when it comes to the doctor seeing what looks like abuse, which is
absolutely.
Often the marks of BDSM are very difficult to distinguish from marks of abuse. So, have you encountered any stories or heard about anyone sort of navigating those scenarios? Because ultimately, as we talked about before, legally, you cannot consent to be hit. That's not something you can really consent to at a legal level. So, it's up to the doctor at some point. It's up to their discretion on whether or not to call the police. So has anyone here experienced or heard of stories of this?
Unfortunately. Unfortunately, yes. The venue that I used to run and be a part of, we held multiple events on a quarterly basis, and one of the annual events allowed the most masochistic of our community to compete if they chose to. This was their idea and everything, but we had multiple dungeon monitors and even 2 paramedics who were volunteers on standby in the event that something happened. And the last one that I hosted and attended, one of the individuals who had participated falsely disclosed that they had eaten and drank and were properly prepared for the scene, and their body went into shock post-beating. So, after many hours of trying to get the electrolytes in their body under the guidance of the volunteer paramedic we had on hand, we did eventually have to contact for an ambulance to come bring them to the emergency room. We couldn't do an IV line because we didn't have the required documents to have the paramedic just banana bag them, as we call it, with electrolyte. That's what the doctors call it, actually. It's the banana bag. It's
interesting.
It's just a tube of saline water to hydrate and give you the electrolytes you need to recover, to pull them out of shock. So they wound up having to go, and myself and the other person who was involved in the scene, because I was the dungeon monitor who wound up... I was the event host and the dungeon monitor who wound up actually having to sit there and hold their hand and make sure that they were actually consuming things and comfort them through the shock of what was happening, because they were still cognizant, but their body was trembling and a lot of things were just going wrong. They were still conscious, but a lot of things were just going wrong because they had not prepared themselves appropriately for the scene.
Mhm.
So this is actually the waiver we have everybody sign at those events, and it's written with the assistance of if anybody is familiar with any BDSM writings or authors or lecturers or legal experts, that waiver is written with the assistance of Jay Wiseman, who has been in Kink and BDSM as an educator and legal expert for 40 years. And has defended in cases with that. But this person, ill-prepared, went into shock, trembling, started, even though we got Pedialyte, we kept Pedialyte in our emergency kit anyways, and then our paramedic on hand also had some stuff to assist. We got Pedialyte and some small, easy foods into them to try to ease up as much as we could. Myself and the person who performed the scene wound up going with them to the emergency room to primarily, discuss what happened. I had the documentation on hand for this person. I also advocated for them because they were a trans individual, which, if you know trans medical care, it is very risky and tends to be very aggressive towards individuals like them. But I communicated clearly with those who were involved what was happening and that it was actually voluntary, that they had not, to any of our knowledge, been consuming any alcohol or drugs, which they had not. They even tested to make sure they were clean of that. They just had not eaten and had not hydrated properly, so their body went into shock. And of course, because there was violence involved, they are legally required to have the police come and discuss with us as well. And because it was consenting parties in an area and an established venue that most states will not accept a lot of what happened. I'll just preface this. It's a very tricky situation of knowing where your limits are. You have to literally go through the laws and figure out with not just your state, but your local ordinances and gauging sort of how, I hate to put it this way, conservative it is, because the more conservative an area is, the more adverse they're going to react to this. So we chose a very liberal area for a reason. So that we could address this if it happened. But
basically,
I explained
that people would have understanding of the situation and the lifestyle.
Yes, they're a little more open-minded. You have to be prepared for the adverse political beliefs. Unfortunately, tie into this a lot when it comes to the legalities of it.
Sure, you have trans individuals, your non-traditional lifestyles.
Yes, it's a very non-traditional thing. It's a very hefty conversation, especially with police officers. But as the venue representative, I just explained this person consented to this. They requested this. They were very enthusiastic about it. And even in the bed, they were afraid of the police, understandably so. But we're like, yes, I consented to this. I am, because they were coming out of shock by the time the police even arrived. Which the doctors were just required to call as a sort of safety thing in the event it was abuse, because they can only do so much. But she was very enthusiastic about, yes, I consented to this, I asked for this, and I understand that my body is in shock and that this is my responsibility. I am not pressing charges. I would like the state to not press charges. Please don't. And her having that enthusiastic consent, even up to that point, was very important. It was integral to this, not having major legal repercussions, which is why we always made sure, like, we had the documentation they couldn't sue, and the venue and the representatives of the venue were protected, but also to do what we could to protect those involved in the scene, unless it genuinely was a breach of consent, which is why we always had a monitor on hand. So you could have this waiver, you always have this, you can always have this waiver on hand, but you always need someone to supervise if you're going to do something of severe risk in the event of especially severe beating or edge play with knives, or especially suspension in shibari. The biggest one for me is suspension and shibari. You always want to have a second set of hands in the event of an emergency to at least
I bet Ned will know about that.
Because I'm sure Ned knows that if he's trying to suspend someone who happens to be a little heavier than he might be able to manage, or if the rope goes wrong one way, you need someone to help hold that body up so that you can cut it down and get them safer, rather than accidentally breaking a neck while trying to get them out of the rope.
Oh Lord, yeah.
I've seen some pretty rough stuff, but the big one was the big case that I was involved in, with having to witness and, you know, observe her enthusiastic consent all the way up into the police being like, okay, no, they actually consented to this. Yes, she is hurt, but they viewed it as if she had been rock climbing or skateboarding and just had an injury from her hobbies.
Violence versus harm.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
I think the takeaway here, though, is that everything went right in that scenario where things could have gone very wrong because of the fact that it was a professional setting, an established venue, and a sort of impartial third party.
Yes.
You can imagine that if it's just a couple that's engaging in BDSM, that situation would have potentially gone differently.
Oh, yes.
So I think that's something to really drive home to people, is that being really careful in your play is essential. All of those safeties that we discussed earlier is essential, because you won't necessarily have that sort of backing to prevent you from going to jail.
Oh, absolutely. And like Frank just said in chat, it only requires a fall the equivalent of your body height to cause a traumatic brain injury or a spinal injury, depending on how you fall. And if you die and you have bruises all over you, and it's just the two of you, and your partner could go to jail, because that looks suspicious. So you have to be very well prepared. And this is why we say community is very important, and having a safe space with the knowledge and the extra hands and the preparedness and the knowledge of that risk, especially. Because what Kink is not safe at all. But there are safe ways to prevent worse damage.
Those are great points, and you even see it in this legal release form here. Like, this is not just a boilerplate legal thing. This is saying straight up, like, these activities are unpredictable. Mistakes can be made. It says right there, right in the fourth paragraph. The equipment devices might fail. Like, these are all things that are very, very clearly spelled out here, because at the end of the day, this is not like rock climbing or like kayaking. It is and it isn't, basically, you know.
Well, there's no safe harbor, that's for sure.
Yeah, yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you for these examples, by the way, Ari.
Of course. That's why I was like, I'm not gonna lie, that's why I was panicking to find them today when I was like, okay, I'm home, I'm not at the doctor's, I can take the time to find this, and
Yeah, I hope you don't mind. I saved them. I may be using these in the future.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely fine.
Same.
They are free resources that I will give to anyone, especially like if you're trying to start and develop a kink community that's a little newer, because I know there's a bit of a generation gap in a lot of kink communities. We felt it when I was in Michigan.
Oh yeah.
I actually had my toes in both pools. I was able to be a bridge between the two, which was really nice, because I felt special. I won't lie, I felt special.
I'm a conduit.
But it helped me bring knowledge from both the newer generation and the older generation together, especially with things like these forums, which is me pulling together information from multiple facets to help try to prevent any major issues and breakdowns in communication, especially since communication and clear communication, even in the event of an emergency, is absolutely necessary when you're trying to make sure that you are navigating the law correctly with this. Like, if something goes wrong, you need to be able to communicate clearly to the police or doctors what happened, even if you are scared of repercussions. With doctors, it is important they know everything that happened so that they can know where they need to start with the body and what to check for, because there's stuff you may not even see and that they won't see on the surface. Like, if somebody's suspended, how I said it earlier, somebody's suspended and the rope moves even the slightest bit the wrong way, it could break or harm an arm in a very bad way, or you could fall on your head if you're trying to come out of the rope and cause traumatic brain injury, whether it is like mild to severe, like a light concussion, to being in a coma with brain bleed. That's just a very real situation, and that's part of the risk of doing anything like that. And if you are, don't judge me for this, anyone, I say this to chat, not to anybody in this VC, if you are into knife play or the riskier things like that, or needle play, where you are opening the flesh and creating a wound, being aware of bloodborne pathogens and where not to cut and where not to stab so that you don't hit a vein or an artery and cause a major bleed or do harm to an organ. That kind of stuff is very important, and knowing how to clean up after that in a safe manner. There are so many safe ways to do that kind of stuff. I see someone switch their look a little bit.
Yeah, we need that BBG certification, Ari. Val's got the blood out.
But if you're very interested in anything that is more aggressive like that, do the research and do the study is absolutely free on bloodborne pathogens. The test isn't, the certification isn't, but it's very cheap. But it's there as a safety precaution, especially since there are a lot of tattoo artists and piercers. I actually used to be a piercer post needle play. And I have assisted in educating in needle play and knife play and safety on that part too, which is why I really, really, really say definitely look at bloodborne pathogen, because you never know, like, the amount of things that are in the blood that can make you sick unless you actually study it. People in the medical field know for sure, but if you, I highly recommend bloodborne pathogens, especially so that you can clean up properly and do this safely for your submissive and yourself when it comes to towing the line of the legality of this, because it is a very fine line.
I had a question for Ned, actually. So Ned, since you work with a lot of like performers and models that may be just encountering this for the first time, do you find that they're able to sort of have these sort of waivers and liability things in place, or are you finding that you're educating them on that as well?
It depends. If they are a content creator, a lot of times they'll have their own form that I'll show up to, and it will cover everything from like, you know, consent to where they want their videos seen, not seen. So if they're an experienced content creator, generally they'll have their own forms. It's when I am dealing with newer people that they won't, and what I print out is very much so smaller than what has been provided. That it's like, all right, it's just a basic fundamental, like, hey, all right, you know, if you get hurt, not my fault, as long as I don't do anything out of what we discussed or do anything negligent. This is a high risk thing. You agree that there are risks to this, but for the most part, I've not had anyone that's been unreceptive to that. And I feel like it's worked decently well so far.
Very cool. I particularly asked that because, like, I know, like, more and more people are getting into OnlyFans, Fansly, and things like that, pursuing it potentially, like content creation on the adult side. So it's almost like the wild, wild west out there. Like, a lot of these independent performers are like navigating these things on their own. So I'm curious, like, what it's like out there. If people just like will ring you up and be like, "Oh yeah, I'd like you to do this to me," and then just like have no idea what they're getting into, you know.
And navigating, like, making that kind of content with new people.
Absolutely.
Oh, I just killed the conversation. I am
No.
so sorry.
It sounded like there was more to that statement or question.
Oh, I
That's
see.
why.
No, I
Oh,
was just being like Atros hype man.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
So I mean, generally, I advertise that hey, I'm a rigger. I do this kind of stuff. Sometimes I do go to content creators. A lot of times it's them saying, "Hey, I see what you do. I want to add this to my portfolio." And those ones will always. I've never had someone approach me that didn't have some sort of contract, like ready to go the instant I stepped in.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes if I reach out to them, it's when I have to provide one, which is not a bad thing. I do take, measures to make sure that they are comfortable, that they feel safe.
Oh, yeah.
I always encourage them, bring a buddy. Please don't make it just you and me in this room. Please bring a friend,
A chaperone.
a chaperone.
Monitor.
Yeah, because I don't want.
Oh,
I want
yeah.
them to be comfortable. And like with suspension stuff, especially with suspension, I refuse to do it alone. Someone brought it up that like sometimes you might need two people. It doesn't matter if I need it or not. I want a second person there.
Oh, absolutely. That's a safety measure.
Because I've been doing this for a bit, it's still something I'm not 100% comfortable in. So having the other person to like check me and be like, "Hey, don't put that there," is highly important to me. But yeah, more and more with content creators, I've noticed a lot of them are on point and like I treat it like the business that it is.
That's good.
Yeah, very good. Makes my life easier.
I imagine.
Oh, it really makes it easy when they know what they want and how to communicate that. If you are, I will say, if you're newer to content creation and looking to collaborate with others and want to feel a little bit safer in agreements with that, make sure that you have a negotiation beforehand. You can do 1 or 2 meetings or however many you think it takes for you to feel comfortable and confident with the person you're trying to collaborate with. And if you really want to make sure that, like, somebody has reviewed a contract or waiver that displays everything that you are intending to happen with the risks involved, you can always have somebody from the community that is very knowledgeable try to sort of mediate that to make sure that you guys are both on the same page and the risk is very well understood, especially since it's a content creation goal. Or if you are both comfortable with it, you can even have a contract notarized, which means that contract is then recognized by the state. As that person agreed to this risk, their consent can be withdrawn at any time. However, they know the risks involved with the activities being performed.
I do want to point out,
Which has which has a little more power than just the two of you signing, because a notary witnessing a signature helps with proving there is no intimidation factor being put in.
No coercion.
That's very obvious.
Yes.
Yeah, no coercion or intimidation, which is very important and something that police are definitely going to look at if something does go wrong. That's something you need to be prepared for. So that's why clear communication, which is why I made this lovely 10-page questionnaire, which again is voluntary information, but it helps clear up a lot of communication issues I have found, among others, because part of my job when I ran this venue was actually mediating situations where people had their consent breached, but also had not clearly communicated their consent for the person to know that they were breaching that consent. So that's why I've developed this way I have, to open up the doors for multiple questions. And again, it's a free resource. If you want it, don't hesitate to ask. I'm actually working on updating my card. There's a whole other page that's literally going to be dedicated to stuff like this.
Very awesome. Make sure you let us know when you get that done so we can post it out there.
Absolutely. It's been a long time coming. We moved, just got into the house.
Yeah.
But making sure that the communication is very clear is very important.
So chat, this here is where you can mark your Your erogenous zones, no touch zones, desensitized. It's cropped because there's genitalia on the far right of the of there, but you can get the daddy twitch doesn't like that, even if it's educational. So
yeah. There's questions around psychology there for multiple reasons. At the beginning of the medical and psychological area, you will note questions about aggression, and that is because if someone has temperamental issues, like issues with keeping their anger or temper in check, making sure that you have someone there prepared to be the sort of limit or even if you are hesitant at that point to go forward with a dom who admits to having aggression issues or a short temper, being prepared for that. Because if you have a negative response to anger or aggression, it's already bad enough. But when you add it to kink, it makes it scarier, and we're trying to avoid trauma there.
of course. So you can see here, page 3 has medical issues, kink-aware contacts, very clearly elucidating here whether or not you will be having sex or not. Very important.
Okay, so yeah, the emergency contact, you want to make sure they are aware of what you are doing, so that if they are contacted in the event of an emergency, they're not like, I didn't know this person was into this, and I didn't know they were doing this. Are you sure it's not abuse? It's very important that they are kink aware. They may not be your usual emergency contact, like how I wasn't the primary emergency contact for my former business partner, but I was their kink aware emergency contact because they didn't want their adult children contacted in the event they wound up in the emergency room from this.
Here we're looking at PTSD and triggers. Very, very detailed here.
Oh yeah,
Triggers.
especially since everybody's triggered by something different. It's very important to be aware of that.
And then you have communication here. Very interesting. A lot of very interesting questions here. Like, I've intentionally made a partner angry, sad, or upset. I can acknowledge when I've done something wrong. These are like not things you would normally be asked, but I'm seeing is very important to like everyone's safety and consent here.
Oh yeah. I will say with the intentionally made a person sad or angry or things, there are some, this is very uncommon, but there are some scenarios where someone has grown away from being that type of person, or it has been discussed in a dynamic that they want the anger or sadness to be triggered so that they can process that or learn to process that, especially if they struggle to process emotions and are working with a therapist, because BDSM can be very therapeutic if you do it correctly. So there's a lot of various scenarios behind a lot of the questions in this very long. You can even you can see I defined the basic part of the nonverbal and the stoplight system on that last page.
Yep.
Just
all there, yeah.
Yep.
If you're okay with it, we'll split it around Discord server and such. Just to, like, get it
Oh
out.
yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it's an entire 10-page document. I recommend, if you are at all interested in BDSM play and so on, to give this a read. It will help you develop a framework of talking about this.
Oh yeah.
And to what to sort of expect when you're in a negotiation with somebody.
Or to help you even negotiate if, like, neither of you really know how to expect it or guide where it's going.
Right, because you may not know. Yeah.
I remember my first time negotiating, and I had no clue what I was doing, and was just like, well, here's kind of what I'm looking for, but I really don't know what I'm looking for. I'm just trying to resolve some of these issues upon the recommendation of some friends. This was pre-therapy, by the way. But it did actually wind up being very therapeutic. And there were aspects that I wish I had been prepared for, especially with the traumas and trying to figure out triggers and knowing and communicating more of what had happened to me, or like how to control or avoid recreating that scenario, or those scenarios if you have multiple instances, like myself, and just trying to learn more about yourself and your boundaries and safety. It's that's a big piece as to why I took the many months that I took to develop that document. It was because it is something that I wish I had had.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's a great resource. It's probably the most comprehensive I've seen so far. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
So I did have a question actually, because the term's come up a few times. But what exactly is edge play? Who wants to explain that one to me?
Oh, Val.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
I just say I've done a lot of talking. I'm gonna grab some water while Val explains this. Actually,
Yes. So edge play is typically whenever you're doing BDSM play that's really pushing boundaries. That's where edge comes from. So often things like knife play are considered edge play. But it can also encompass a range of other things like needle play and, well, blood play and yes, many of the other more extreme ends of impact play and other things.
Sort of when you're like get really scraping up against like potential legal issues if something goes wrong.
But well, not just legal issues, but it's certainly the realm of play where you're increasing risks. You're reaching the point where serious injuries are more likely.
So, and I'm sorry I'm making everyone define so many things, but what exactly is impact play? Because I thought it was like something like spanking, but I think it might be more than that now.
Well,
impact
can...
Oh,
go ahead.
No, please, you carry on.
Impact can cover a wide variety of things. It can be anything from spanking, like you said, to things like using crops, whips, or even more intense things like pucks and punching and more heavy impact.
Oh, like cattle prods or something.
Well,
Gotcha.
It's just play where impact is involved, so you are
yes.
hitting or striking another person. So it could be something like a light spank, but it could also be, tying someone up and beating them with a hippo hide whip. It can be, a lot of things.
Did you
do you mind if I...
hippo hide whip?
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
think people would know what a shambok was, so I just said... Do you mind if I answer Frankazoid's question?
Sure,
Because
go for it.
it's piqued my interest. Frankazoid says, I'm a very distrusting individual, so being put into a position where I have to trust someone is very frustrating to deal with. But I don't want to always be as distrustful towards people. Would trying out being a sub help with that? In my opinion, not being distrustful of people, learning to be more trusting, is a matter of practice. Submission and exploring a submissive space is a form of practice. So if that interests you, then absolutely. But it's not necessarily, it's not specifically submitting that's going to be therapeutic in that sense. It's just going to be an avenue of practice with being more trusting and putting yourself out there. So it could take any form that makes sense to you.
absolutely. As someone who used to be very, very distrusting, I would start with just communicating with those you think you trust the most, and gauging how comfortable you are sharing more of yourself. Because what I actually just recently had to explain this to a partner, what a lot of people don't comprehend with the submissive part when they're first stepping into it is that it's not just a state of physical vulnerability. You are opening yourself up to a lot of emotional vulnerability when you try to submit to anyone, and it's better to try to do that in a non-kink setting first and make sure you've worked through any emotions that could overwhelm you. Otherwise, your subspace could very much be overwhelmed by the sudden turn of emotions. And more than once, I've had newer submissives go into that where they just start crying and they don't understand what's happening when it's a they're in a place where they finally feel safe enough at times. It varies per individual, but for the ones that did this the most, they felt safe enough and didn't comprehend that they were feeling safe enough to actually open up to just the raw emotion without the thought behind it, and were not prepared for the crying or panicked about the crying or anything like that when they were first stepping into it. So that's where, like, I know Ned said earlier that crying's a hard limit for him, where that's where he'll stop the scene. That's a good place to stop and or pause if you do wind up going that far anyways, if you try to trust and then wind up trusting to feel safe enough in that to have that happen. And stepping away to sort of assess and process that.
To give my 2 cents for Freakazoid's question, I would be very cautious about getting into the kink scene as a sub if you are a genuinely distrusting person.
Yeah.
I would try and get trusting outside and then come into the kink side. My concern is that if you are distrusting, being a sub in a lot of ways also makes you feel vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And being distrusting and being vulnerable at the same time is a very bad combination for some people. If you think this will help you, start very, very slow and ease your way into it.
Intimate conversations first.
Yes. I would not tell you not to join this because I love this community and it's done wonders for me in my mental state. But just be careful.
Mm-hmm.
My first thought was therapy is the right place to work on trust issues. You can practice, as everyone has said, with BDSM later, but let's start with therapy.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's a great point. We have a
Ain't
question
no
in chat
shame in
from-
therapy.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I love therapy.
Me too.
We have a question in chat from Hexy. Hexy says, "This is a question I've had for a while, but what is your opinion on things like somnophilia? I personally feel comfortable waking up someone with oral and someone waking me up with oral, even if there is consent given prior, because it feels uncertain because they're asleep. Does it depend on the person, or is it a complete no-go because it's possibly could be a gray area?"
100% depends on the person.
Mhm.
What you just said makes me know it's not your thing, which is 100% fine. It is something that I'm not comfortable doing unless I'm familiar with you. But it's person to person. If you're not comfortable with it, tell them you're not comfortable with it. They don't respect that.
Oh yeah.
You kick them the fuck out.
Personally, I am a somniophile, 100%. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, chat. You get to know the intimate me. What I recommend for those who are into it, but it's a sort of situational day-to-day thing where your consent and mood can change. You can develop a sort of trinket system, as I like to call it, where you wear a particular item or jewelry to bed if you are open to it at the time of going to bed. But if you wake up to it, if you are uncomfortable with it upon waking up or being woken up by that play, you can use your safe word or withdraw that item from your body if you're nonverbal immediately. Everything must be communicated and negotiated beforehand, especially with something that toes the line like this, because it is a gray area. But you really, really, really need to communicate and develop a system. And you can try out different types of systems for it, because there are a lot of different recommendations people will make for things to try to sort of communicate subtly or even directly how you're feeling with it. And I love what Rain says. My significant other and I use color-coded collars. And mine, depending on how I'm feeling physically anyways, I'll either wear my collar to bed or not. Or if like I wake up feeling that type of way, I'll put it on immediately if I went to bed without it. For the receiving end. And then for the giving end, I will communicate with my partner, like, hey, if you do or don't wear this particular item, if it's clean, as far as clothing item, unless we happen to could have been naked because it's 100 fucking degrees. At which point we just have to communicate where we're at mentally before going to bed, if we're even interested in that night. But just make sure you negotiate and communicate appropriately if you're into that or if you're not, and discuss what type of system you would like to try out or to utilize going forward.
It's very important to note here that these are like established partners and they're still talking about consent even way into like, the relationship. So like this conversation never ends. It's always constant like communication.
Mm-hmm.
Ned,
the biggest thing...
something to say?
I was just saying communication is key.
Yeah, just say the biggest thing we keep repeating is just communication and learning to develop your communication skills around this, because in any aspect of life, the biggest, and I mean any aspect of life, the biggest thing is always going to be communication.
Mm-hmm. While we may keep repeating it, it's still a very important lesson that covers so many scenarios that are being detailed right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason we keep repeating it.
Exactly.
I will pound it into your head verbally. Communication. Communication. Communication.
Oh, a little extra list of that one.
For those who didn't hear it the first time. If
you're not sure about something like somnophilia, you can do a role play. For example, my partner is very into the idea of sleep play, but he was unsure about how to go about it. So we did it. I said, okay, well, look, I am fully awake. I'm going to pretend to be asleep. Like we're going to do a role play. You won't. Oh, Google, I wasn't talking to you. My entire house is just malfunctioning at the moment, apparently. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be awake, but I'm going to pretend to be asleep. I'm going to be completely limp. I'm going to pretend, and you can see how you feel. And he actually discovered that in doing so, like physically doing it, even though he knew I was awake and enthusiastically consenting, we'd been together for years at that point, he was like, that made me feel like a total creep. Like, I don't think I can do that again.
Oh.
So if you are unsure with something like that, try simulating the activity first and gauge your reactions. There is nothing wrong with taking baby steps if you're unsure.
Absolutely. All right, then. So we are coming up on 2 hours, so I'm going to ask Chat. Chat, do you have any other questions for our panelists here?
Any questions for my Google, apparently?
Since your Google's into it.
to my panelists, if there's anything we haven't covered yet, this would be a great opportunity to bring it up.
While you're waiting on any other questions, I will, following the roleplay and enacting scenarios type thing, there's a beginner's bondage game that is, it's all
Harry,
psychology.
you're getting lower and lower and lower as the thing goes
my
on.
tracking is fucked now. It's just it's wonky. I apologize. But there is this psychology bondage game that I remember playing, and I enjoy playing it with newer individuals, where you're not actually bound, but it's the stapling of paper cuffs, if any of the other panelists know which game I'm talking about with this. Mm-hmm. Around the wrists, and if the sub breaks it, the game is over. The scene ends right there. And you assume aftercare. But it's a good practice for not actually being bound, but simulating having the restraint. so that you can sort of gauge how you'd respond to different things while you're bound. And if you're actually comfortable with it before adventuring into actual bondage or rope play or anything like that where you wind up restrained. That's one very fun way to do that.
It's a very good way to see if that's even something you're interested in.
Absolutely. If you panic when you're bound by paper cuffs, and then I don't think bondage play is for you. On the receiving end, at least. The couch too slippery? Oh, yeah, I'm just sliding on down.
You're just getting comfy.
Yeah,
there's a chaise longue under there. She's just stretching.
It's not an actual game. It's you take paper that can wrap around the wrist, and you staple the hoops around each wrist, and then you staple those two together, usually in front of the person or behind the person, depending on how they feel. If you don't have staples, tape works too, to just hold together. You know how people used to make like paper chains and still make paper chains with taping little loops of paper through each other? It's essentially what you're doing with the person. But you negotiate beforehand what you sort of want to play and how you want to go about it. And the biggest rule with it is if they break the paper, the scene is over. If they break out of the restraints, the scene is over.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Bondage light for beginners.
It's the first time hearing of it, but that sounds very interesting, especially since we have quite a few bondage curious people in chat right now.
Oh yeah, especially because you have to remember that bondage and kink are primarily mind games around sexuality. They are more mind than physical.
Yeah, they don't even need to include sex.
Which is why that's included in the questionnaire, by the way. You can have scenes without any sexual contact at all. I've oh my god, I've had plenty of therapeutic scenes without any type of sexual or intimate contact like that. Just the massage and the beating.
Only about half my clients even generally want to have sex. They just want to be restricted.
Oh yeah.
So that's why that's something very much so I asked, like, all right, are we planning on having sex with this, or is this you just want to be tied up? Like, what? I think that's also another very important thing to discuss. Like, all right, do you want sex? Do you want toys? Do you just want to be taken pictures of while being tied up? What's
experience, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the game plan?
Oh yeah.
I see.
Oh my god, please give me a rope hug. Please. let me just go to rope space. It's so good. It's the compression therapy, realistically. It's genuinely something that there are academic papers on. If you ever question it, there are academic papers on it.
Oh yeah.
I may have to dig to find them.
Yeah.
But that's the therapy behind weighted blankets, or like the thunder jackets for animals.
Oh yeah.
Just reducing the panic by compressing the nervous system.
And just deep pressure hugs.
Yeah.
Where you just practically lie on the other person and as Fuzzy says, squash his soul back into his body.
It's adorable.
Yes. There's so many ways to approach it. So
we can
good.
answer these two more questions from chat. So Frank will ask, how many roles are known in the BDSM community? Like Dom, Sub, Brat, Switch, and so on.
How much time do you have?
Right?
Many.
Many. And variations of those roles too.
Maybe I will have to maybe I will have to follow your advice, Atra, and do the series of lectures on that kind of stuff.
You really should.
Yeah,
they would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Hell, I'd be interested in listening.
Listen, I would do it with me. Let's go. We got this.
I'm down.
I've actually played with the idea of doing an After Dark version of this.
Yeah, a series of the depths.
Where we jump onto Fansly and just continue, basically.
Hell yeah. There are a lot of roles. It is almost impossible to count how they are actually addressed because it changes by language, and even language changes definition of what that role is, which changes by relationship. Your dynamic can change there are so many different roles in the BDSM and kink communities, especially around dynamics, and even a lot of it doesn't necessarily have to do with dominance and submission. There's a lot of stuff to it. That would be a whole 4-hour conversation.
Yeah, my degrees are in psychology and linguistics, so that's definitely an area of interest for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here's a nice little question to sum things up. Where was it? Linux asked, how do you find groups or communities where you live in an area with a smaller population?
Look for bunches on FetLife. That's usually people's first port of call. And then Discord communities, kink communities online.
There's a lot of gateways.
Yeah, there are a lot of gateways. Look around and find ones that you like or feel comfortable using. And like generally when people come onto Yesmas, because we're not a sexual space, we're mainly focused on community and education. When people want to like break into the scene and meet other people, the first thing we say is, well, why don't you go to a munch, which is like a casual meetup of people who are into similar things, and you can arrange activities or not. And yeah, just hang out online or find in-person hangouts, local dungeons, playgroups, depending on your country. These may or may not be freely available. But I encourage you to reach out online first and branch out from there.
VR chat is also a good place.
Oh, yeah, very true. And for those of you who don't know, FetLife is a social media network centered on kink and finding partners and such. That's FETLIFE.
That's one way to do it. Personally, I started working at an adult shop, ironically enough, in retail. But I learned through them when an event came in and tried to advertise, like they were having a fetish flea market is what they called it, which was a silly little name for it, but they had a lot of vendors come and do trades and stuff. But members of that community came in and they had a little card for their FetLife page, and people would come into the store, and you can sometimes ask your local adult retailers if they know of any kink or BDSM communities that are safe and renowned in your area, because there are communities in every state. And if you need a network to those communities, FetLife is going to be a really great doorway through that. A lot of stores will nudge you in that direction. But you can also, you can also check. There are, oddly enough, some Facebook groups. And
Twitter pages,
Discords, and connecting through individuals online who might nudge you in the direction of some really good communities.
Right answer. So I think that's a good place to end it. I'm going to ask you all, first of all, thank you all very much for participating in this episode of the podcast. It was very informative, and we learned a lot about like the community, communication, and even some of the scarier parts of the BDSM lifestyle, which is not to scare anyone away from doing this, but to just tell people to be a little more careful when they're out there, and to communicate and to like rely on a community. Don't just tackle this on your own. So if you have anything to plug, I'll start with Lady Mystique.
Thank you. You can find all of my links and content at ladymystique.tv. That's LADYMYSTIQ.tv.
All right, thank you, Mystique. Always a pleasure to have you as a co-host and a guest. Ari, how about you?
You can almost always find me on Twitch in somebody's chat. I'm very active on Twitter. And if you're unsure of anywhere else to look for me or to check for updates, you can check out arifay.com. Join my Discord if you would like to be part of the community or have any other questions. I do have an adult section for bringing up topics like this and talking about them, but I'm a little inactive for the moment, but I'm more than welcoming of any of your questions there or online. Any of my socials will be linked at airyfay.com.
Thank you.
And apparently, we're gonna look at doing some Fansly for some lectures.
Exactly. Awesome Airy talks. And again, thank you again for sharing your resources with us. It's very helpful.
Of course. Thank you for having me very much, and for doing this.
Yeah, and Val, how about you?
Well, you can primarily find me on Twitter at Valgoria, but I'm also the same at Valgoria on all platforms. So, easy to find.
Yes, and Valgoria is primarily a YouTuber at the moment, is that correct?
Yes. Still getting rolling, but Twitter's the best place to find my content for now.
Thank you very much, Val. And again, thank you so much for the idea for this podcast. I genuinely
Of course.
found it so informative and fun. And last but not least, Ned.
Hello. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at ArachNeds. Main way to get in contact with me would be Twitter. Semi-active on Discord, but not a lot. So, yeah. Just see y'all around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And strong encouragement.
And thank you, Atra, for hosting this and bringing this together.
Of course. So you can follow all these lovely people here by looking at the title. They're all linked and tagged. And again, thank you, chat. Also, thank you, as Puzzle pointed out, thank you, chat, for your attention, your feedback, and your questions. And we really do appreciate it. We are going to be signing off here at the Devs Podcast. Before we go, we're going to go through the next topic and guests for the Devs Podcast number 10 happening in 2 weeks. So, are you ready? Here's the video. Thank you again for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
Oh no, Ned's still on the screen.
I know.
Next time on the dead.